The door beneath the convent. A group of researchers put their flashlights down into the dark floor of a Nazareth convent from the 1800s and found history stacked on top of each other like pages in an old book. Professor Ken Dark and his team carefully looked over the Sisters of Nazareth spot again from 2006 to 2010. Researchers thought they knew a lot about the town where Jesus grew up until they found what they did. A few feet below the church of the convent, walls made of limestone rose from the dirt. They were not shaped by monks in the Middle Ages, but by a builder in the 1st century. The pieces of what used to be a house were partly cut into the rock, and the doorway, plastered floor, and carved stone stairs that led up were still there after all these years. Pottery pieces and small oil lamps found on the floor were all from the early Roman period. This building was built during a time when Nazareth was thought to be nothing more than an empty mountain. It wasn't a story, it was a house. The group knew that the story didn't end with that house. The stone above and around the house told its own story. People turned the land into a pit when the family that lived there before moved or died. To get building blocks, walls were cut down, leaving tool marks that are still there. Then someone new came in. Jewish rock-cut tombs that looked exactly like tombs from the time of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. As they cut through the empty pit, they sealed the evidence that in the 1st century, Jews lived here and buried their dead there. After many years, people came back, but not to live, but to worship. When Christianity spread across the empire in the 4th century, travelers carved a cave church around the old house. They kept the doorway and stairs inside a holy room. The roof was dark from the candles, and small crosses were carved into the plaster. A house that used to be there had been turned into a shrine. By the time of the Byzantine Empire, the cave church was sealed off by a large monastery. In the ground, archaeologists found pieces of colored mosaics, marble columns, and gold glass tesserae that were still shining. One piece had a Greek writing that said Christo, which means to Christ. After being changed completely, the place where a family used to eat, sleep, and pray was now one of the first churches in Nazareth. After that came the Crusaders. They rebuilt the church again in the 1100s, adding new stone to the old walls. But there was war in the area, and in 1187, a fire burned down the top levels, leaving only ash. On top of that black layer, the history stayed hidden for almost 800 years. Ken Dark's team finally mapped out the whole sequence and realized they were in the middle of the most full vertical record of Nazareth's history, from Jesus' time to the Crusades. Each group left its mark, but none of them erased the ones that came before. For many years, critics said that Nazareth didn't exist in the 1st century and that the gospel writers made it up. The Rock didn't agree, though. The layers below the convent showed that people had lived, worshipped, and remembered there for 2,000 years. When a laser scan lit up the stairs of that first house, it was a quiet high point in the finding. The beams showed a road that was still in good shape after 2,000 years, one step at a time. It wasn't remade or replaced because it had been through an earthquake, an invasion, and the rebuilding that went on above it. That one set of stairs became the link between history and religion, a real way to connect a modern convent to a family in the 1st century. The discovery not only proved that Nazareth existed, but it also showed that early Christians remembered it through buildings, not stories. The home run by the Sisters of Nazareth wasn't proof of a miracle, it was proof of faith, persistence, and survival. It was a warning that history doesn't go away. It waits patiently below ground until someone pays attention. What was under the floor of that convent was just the beginning. Archaeologists would soon find another site just outside the walls, across a narrow street. This one would show how the whole hidden town of Nazareth used to live, work, and fight against the empire above it. The hidden settlement Franciscans used simple tools and faith to dig under the Church of the Annunciation because they thought something might be hidden there. Later, when Professor Ken Dark looked over their notes and samples again, he saw an amazing picture. A real town that was still working had been buried under hundreds of years of stone and silence. The ground below the church showed deep storage pits cut into the rock, silos used to store grain, and round basins that were once used to press olives and grapes. There were still bits of oil and crushed seeds on the walls, showing that people used to live and work here. It wasn't a convent or a holy place to stay. People in that village got their food from the hills and traded with nearby towns to make ends meet. It was made up of pieces of pottery from cooking pots, small clay oil lamps, and smooth limestone basins that were used for mikvaot, which are sacred baths for purity. The dates from the lab were the same as those from the house under the convent, the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE. The pottery at both sites spoke the same language. One family built into the hill, and another family built across the valley floor. That was the first time archaeologists had solid proof that Nazareth was already alive before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. This was a long time before doubters said Nazareth had even existed. Some historians thought Nazareth was a later town and didn't exist until after 70 CE, around the middle of the 1900s. The dirt told a different story. The early Roman layers were not mixed with other layers later on because they were sealed under Byzantine floors. Every shovel of dirt went against 100 years of doubt. As the team dug deeper, they found something no one saw coming: a narrow, winding path under the old workshops. It looked like a drain at first, but as the tunnel got longer and the roof got black from old lamps, they saw that it wasn't meant for water, but for hiding. The smooth edges had marks from hand chisels that had been used to cut quickly, but on purpose. Inside, the air was still and cold, as if time had sealed it shut since the day someone ran inside. In case of an emergency, these were refugee caves that were dug during the Jewish revolt against Rome from 66 to 73 CE. Across Galilee, people built tunnels to avoid being caught, and Nazareth's tunnel was built in the same way. It was easy for archaeologists to see where the villagers used to crawl, store food, and wait in silence while soldiers passed above as they knelt through the tight area. The faint burn marks from the oil lamps could still be seen on the ceiling. They were a last reminder of fear and faith. The find changed what scholars knew about the town. Nazareth wasn't forgotten or empty. It was living, on guard, and very Jewish. In the mikvah basins, religious purity was shown. In the tunnels, resistance was shown. And in the pottery, everyday life was shown to be lived in constant danger. All of these discoveries showed that Nazareth wasn't a ghost town, but rather a small, determined community that stuck to its customs even as the empire clamped down on Galilee. That consistency could be seen in even the layers above. Families filled in the tunnels, rebuilt their homes, and used the silos to store oil and wine jars when peace came back. Soon after, churches were built on top of those homes, but the ground below still had the marks of all the people who lived there before them: plows, jars, tools, and war wounds. Archaeology did more than prove that the town existed under the Church of the Annunciation. It showed how it beat. It showed a people who farmed, built, and lived through revolt and ruin. What looked like an empty spot on the map before was now a stronghold. And just outside the church walls, there was another mystery. A field study would find evidence that linked this hidden settlement to something even bigger, a valley that separated two worlds, one shaped by empire and the other by faith. The hills are between Nazareth and the Roman city of Sepphoris, the Valley of Resistance. There is a shallow valley between Nazareth and the close city of Sepphoris. It is quiet now, but it used to be the line between two different worlds that no one could see. From 2004 to 2008, Professor Ken Dark and his team walked this land step by step, drawing 5-meter lines on the ground to record every piece of pottery, tool, and other artifact that was found. What they found on both sides of that valley showed more than just how people lived. It showed how different cultures clashed in the ground. From the side of Sepphoris, it looked like the center of a Roman region. Pieces of shiny red pottery from Italy, pieces of colored glass vessels, and even pieces carved with pagan symbols could be found all over the fields. These were the signs of wealth and empire, proof of trade, art, and the good times people had living in style under Roman rule. It looked like the ground itself was shining with the wealth and power that it could bring. The researchers then went across the middle of the valley, which made everything different. The land got flatter on the side facing Nazareth. Not a single piece of pottery from another country showed up. They only found rough, handmade items and thick cups and bowls made of limestone. Everything was native, unpainted, and not decorated. It didn't have any gods, mythical scenes, or strange forms. Everything was useful, the same, and very clean. There was too much of a trend for it to be random. Even though two groups of people lived close to each other, they had very different ideas about how life should be. Sepphoris was full of Roman influence, but Nazareth turned it down. The people in Nazareth were not poor and unable to trade because they could have gone to the same markets, but they decided not to. They didn't want to buy foreign goods that had been made in pagan workshops. Instead, they only kept stoneware that could never become ritually dirty. They did this in a quiet way, to fight back against a power that could easily erase their identity. Another find made just 2 kilometers away, near the modern village of Reyna, gave us a sign about how they thought. A stone vessel mine was found by archaeologist Jonathan Adler. Blocks of limestone were cut and lathe-turned into bowls and cups. These things weren't meant to be shown off. They were made to be clean. By Jewish rules, stone could never become dirty, so Jewish families used them instead of clay or metal pots and pans. The same kind of pots showed up in the ground near Nazareth, connecting the small town to this workshop. Nazareth wasn't alone. It was part of a regional network based on faith and ritual control, as shown by that link. The difference between the two sides of the valley was almost like being in a movie. On top of one hill, Sepphoris shone with painted walls and marble floors. Its streets were filled with the sound of markets and Roman people talking. On the other hills, Nazareth's homes were simple. Their tools were plain and they made their own storage jars. It wasn't space that kept them apart. It was conviction. People from Nazareth had made a psychic line through the land and wouldn't cross it. These differences were shown on Ken Dark's charts, like a scar that goes through history. The Romans must have thought Nazareth was just a small farming village that stuck to old ways. But the simplicity was on purpose. Each jar and cup made by hand was a sign that faith could not be bought or replaced. Nazareth, which was in the middle of a kingdom, chose holiness over comfort and community over business. The town's real power came from that choice. When the field work was done, one thing became clear. Nazareth was never just a small town. It was a way to show who you are. Its people worked the same land as the empire, but they had their own rules. They didn't fight back, but they didn't give up either. They stuck to their purity rules, language, and traditional crafts, even as the world around them changed. The stories they told kept alive the customs that would later shape the first people who followed Jesus. The evidence under faith science has now proven what stories and rocks have been saying for hundreds of years. Archaeologists have found a world that was buried but never went away under the busy streets of modern Nazareth. After being tested over and over, every piece of proof now tells the exact same story that faith alone could never prove. Jody Magnus, a historian at the University of North Carolina, studied the pieces that were dug out of Nazareth's bedrock. These pieces included rough cooking pots, chalk stone vessels, and pieces from homes that were carved by hand. She came to a clear conclusion. People lived in Nazareth in the 1st century. The pattern and burn marks on the pottery looked like things used in Galilee homes at that time. The chalk vessels, which were only found in Jewish homes that followed purity rules, put the evidence firmly in the cultural setting of Jesus' time. There wasn't a space or a missing town. The people who lived here were real and had strong ties to Jewish customs. Someone from the Israel Antiquities Authority, named Yardena Alexandre, opened a second window into the same time a few hundred meters away. Her team found the remains of a courtyard house made in the 1st century from roughly dressed stone. The house was surrounded by quarry debris and rock-cut basins. The earth had the same mix of ceramics that was found under the convent of the Sisters of Nazareth. It had large household items, oil lamp shards, and limestone cups. These weren't one-off finds. They were pieces of the same city that had been kept safe in different parts of town. The finding quietly linked the Nazareth of the Gospels to a real archaeological site. All of this fit into a clear geography thanks to James Tabor's area mapping. He used maps to figure out where Nazareth was, which was between the hills of Yaphia and the Roman capital of Sepphoris. It wasn't a coincidence, it was planned. The hamlet was in a natural basin, out of the way of main roads, but close enough to trade lines for people to stay alive. Because it was hidden, ancient scholars didn't talk much about it. It wasn't a city built to get famous. It was a village built to last. The dating method supported what the pots and buildings had already said. Radiocarbon dating of organic matter in the soil and pottery cross-dating show that people lived there continuously from 100 BCE to 100 CE. Generations have lived, worked, and buried their dead on the same mountain during that small window of time. Early doubters said that people just moved in after Jerusalem fell, but the evidence showed that people had lived there for a long time before that. After that, the 21st century made things even clearer. In the 2020s, LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar were used to make maps of what is under the road in Nazareth today. The scans showed a group of empty places that lined up perfectly with the shapes of old terraces and quarries that had been found in earlier digs. The town from the 1st century can still be seen in the ground, hidden by shops, churches, and homes. Its stepped courtyards, cisterns, and cut stone rooms have been sealed by time. The work that used to take decades could now be seen in a single computer sweep, like a ghostly hologram below the city that people live in. When the data from archaeology, geology, radiocarbon science, and digital imaging were put together, it was clear what the verdict was. Nazareth was not a story made up by later writers. From the end of the Hellenistic time to the beginning of the Roman era, the settlement continued to grow and change. It grew slowly, didn't give in to other cultures, and became the basis on which later Christian memory was built. The picture that comes out is proof of more than just life. It's proof of strength, a hidden city that wouldn't go away. Still, after all the scans and measurements, there is one more question. What deeper truths might be hiding in the rooms below that haven't been discovered yet? The house that became a legend. The quiet high point of the story of Nazareth happens under the Sisters of Nazareth convent, in a house that was normal in the 1st century, but became something amazing. It started out as a simple family home made out of sandstone with clay pots and hand-carved stairs. Over time, it became one of the holiest places in Christian history. The change didn't come from a story. It happened over hundreds of years of respect, protection, and continuity. By the 4th century, Christians who lived in Nazareth, which was still pretty small at the time, started to treat that tomb as holy ground. They thought this was where Jesus and his mother had lived in the past, and it brought back many early memories of their faith. The pilgrims didn't make the link. It was passed down to them. They built thick walls of protective stone around the opening of the old house so that nothing above could disturb it. The house was inside a cave church. They lit up for prayer for the first time, not to cook or do work. It used to smell like bread and oil, but now it smells like smoke. The place changed again over the years. The Byzantine builders built a church on top of the old cave, enclosing the 1st century building like a relic inside stone. They made the floors of the shrine out of marble and decorated it with mosaics and pieces of gold glass. Later, archaeologists found pieces of those tiles along with Greek writing that said Christo, which means to Christ. Everything there showed the same thing. Faith had grown in a certain place. In the 1100s, when the Crusaders came to Nazareth, they found the spot again and rebuilt it as part of a huge cathedral complex. Layers of ash and burned wood show that the building was destroyed in 1187, but the original limestone house was still there under all the blackened rubble. Pilgrim oil lamps in the shape of small boats, pieces of marble from altar rails, and iron nails with crosses carved into them were found. These were gifts from travelers who had come from far away to see where faith started. The thing that these findings show is not a miracle, but memory. Early Christians didn't make up stories to fill empty space. Instead, they kept the actual signs that were already there safe. When people built, prayed, and put things back together here, they connected to something they could still see and touch. Every generation added another layer of sealant around the house, which was an act of protection rather than invention. This is the doorway that an archaeologist sees today. It was once seen by a monk, repaired by a crusader, and home to a family in the 1st century. In every age, the limestone has taken in the smoke from oil lamps, the soot of invasion, and the dust of digging. It holds time inside it.